Ethan's voice, rich with mock sympathy, rang out across the courthouse in Portland. No pension, no medals, no record. She's a fraud. He was 38, slick in his tailored suit, and he relished every cruel syllable. Our mother's estate hearing had become his stage, and I, 35, the sister he'd spent years belittling, was his chosen target. I sat motionless at the defendant's table, my hands folded neatly, refusing to give him the tremor of a response. Across from me, my attorney Claire Robinson rose with her usual quiet authority. She didn't bother to argue. Instead, she handed a sealed cream-colored envelope to the bailiff who delivered it to Judge Whitmore. The judge, 70 and weary from decades of bitter family feuds, sighed as he cracked the crimson seal. His sigh turned into silence. The page he pulled free might as well have set fire to the courtroom. His complexion drained, his eyes flared wide. He looked past Claire, past Ethan's smug grin, to the two deputies by the double doors. His voice was clipped, urgent. "Officers, lock this court now." The iron bolts slammed shut with a weight that silenced even Ethan. His smirk faltered, confusion crawling across his face. That final echoing click traced back to a choice I made 6 months earlier at my mother's funeral. I still remember the church hall thick with lilies, the murmur of condolences floating through the air. Ethan stood in the center, shining like always, balancing a glass of wine in one hand while texting with the other. I lingered at the edge, invisible. Colonel Jameson, an old family friend with silver hair and a spine straight as ever, approached me gently. His sympathy was real, his respect unmistakable. Before I could answer him, Ethan swooped in. He slung an arm around me, laughing loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Don't take her too seriously, Colonel. She files paperwork for some office that calls itself Homeland Security. Serving the country, she says. Truth is the only danger she's seen is a paper cut." Jameson's eyes searched mine, but I gave him nothing more than a strained smile. Inside, though, something shifted, sharp and cold. Ethan thought he was telling a joke. He never realized he was branding me as a fraud in public and later in sworn testimony. What he couldn't see then was that Claire's envelope held a truth heavier than any inheritance. It contained the life I had lived in silence, one he could never erase. My family saw me as a story they had written themselves, a narrative of quiet disappointment. It began when I supposedly dropped out of a doctoral program in international economics at Berkeley, the neat little cover story that explained my sudden move to Washington, D.C. To them, I was a failure who had settled taking a dull desk job at some government agency where nothing of consequence ever happened. They even gave me a nickname, one they assumed I never heard. The archivist, they called me, as if my entire existence had been relegated to shuffling papers in forgotten basements. I was 35, but in their eyes still the timid girl who never measured up to my older brother Ethan. That image sharpened at every family gathering. I remember one particular evening just before my mother's health began to decline. Ethan announced with theatrical flourish that he had landed a massive client for his law firm. The dining room burst into applause. My father opened a bottle of vintage Bordeaux he had been saving for years. The pop of the cork echoed like a starter pistol for the evening's praise, all of it directed at Ethan. When the conversation finally dipped, I spoke softly about an honor I had recently received at work. Before I could explain further, my mother, Margaret, rested her hand on mine with an indulgent smile. "That's nice, dear." Like Employee of the Month, she cooed, her tone soaked in condescension. Then, turning her gaze back to Ethan, she added, "Your brother just negotiated the Callahan case, such brilliance." Her words stung more than I let on. I didn't see the wine glass in my father's hand. I saw the years of "money is tight" that had followed me through school. I saw the old laptop that died during finals, the one I replaced by waiting tables until dawn. Every hard-won scholarship, every published article, every private milestone, each dismissed with a shrug. I swallowed the bitterness, nodded politely, and resumed my part as background character. The good daughter. the archivist. But the truth was far different. My silence was not weakness, it was camouflage. My real life unfolded far from that dinner table in a windowless concrete facility 2 stories underground. A safe, a place where the hum of encrypted servers never stopped. To my family, I was insignificant. In reality, I was a clandestine case officer for the Defense Intelligence Agency. My job wasn't boring. It was a constant crushing weight of responsibility. One mistake could mean life or death for strangers whose names I would never know. My handler was General Peterson, a man who'd seen world maps change and who didn't suffer nonsense. I remember a call with him the same week as the dinner. I sat in the windowless SCIF monitors, humming the concrete walls close. "General," I said, voice low. "Asset Helios confirms the encryption key is compromised. We need to start Operation Blind Harvest. The window is closing." There was no pause. His voice, calm and absolute, carried trust earned in crises. "Your call, Echo 7. He said, using my operational handle. "Execute." In that world, my judgment counted. I wasn't Natalie the archivist. I was Echo 7, someone who greenlit extractions, who chose when safe houses emptied. My service left no ribbons, no VA file, no benefits worth naming. It was designed to be invisible. My father, Samuel, never knew the details. He only noted my absences and the way I returned from trips with edges he couldn't name. At the end, he tried to fix what he'd missed. His will split the estate evenly but tucked in one line. "I wish to acknowledge my daughter Natalie Cross's quiet, unseen service to our country." When Ethan read it, something in him snapped. He didn't scream about money. He railed against his story cracking. For years, he had been the household son and I the dutiful shadow. A single sentence that honored my secret life overturned his narration of us. He contested the will, accusing me of inventing lies to sway a dying man. He branded me a fraud. He told the family I had manipulated Samuel. For a decade, my anonymity had been armor. Silence protected operations and saved lives. Ethan wanted a courtroom spectacle, a public unmasking. He thought exposure would burn down the life I'd built in plain sight. But the mechanisms that kept my career off the books could, under the right authority, validate it with evidence that could not be whispered away. He filed suit. I prepared to answer. After the formal notice arrived, the first thing I felt wasn't sorrow or rage. Instead, I felt a precise resolve. A recognition that the truth could be summoned in forms Ethan never imagined. It was a strange, cold clarity. For years, I had treated my family's dysfunction as an emotional storm to be weathered. But Ethan's legal challenge was different. This was a formal accusation in a court of law. He had moved our private war onto a public battlefield, and that changed everything. It was no longer family. It was an intelligence problem, and it demanded an operational solution. I called Claire Robinson, my attorney, a former JAG lawyer whose reputation was built on precision and restraint. On a secure line, I explained the objective. We were not going to spar over my character. We would not appeal to sympathy. Our aim was to end the conflict with a single, irrefutable display of authority, a move so final that no further argument could exist. It was a tactic I had used in the field many times. Don't fight within the frame. Change the frame entirely. The plan Claire and I developed rested on an obscure but binding legal protocol. The first step required patience. We would let Ethan speak. We needed him under oath, making the accusation plainly that I had lied about my service. His arrogance would bait him into it. While Ethan rehearsed his performance, I prepared my weapon. I logged into a secure government portal and submitted a request for a verification of service directive, not a DD-214, not a service record, but an intelligence confirmation issued under the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. It wouldn't list my assignments or my codename. It would simply affirm in legally binding language that I had served in a capacity exempt from disclosure, and that the court was obligated to accept this verification without question. Claire's role was to deliver the envelope. She would wait for the precise moment when Ethan's accusations reached their height, then present it for private review. The directive authorized the judge to be read into my status under camera in chambers for verification alone. This is a tactical nuke. Claire warned, her voice calm but edged. Once it's opened, Ethan won't just lose. He'll attract attention from people who don't forgive wasted time. I didn't hesitate. He put himself there. Ethan had already chosen to weaponize our father's death and his will. By introducing federal verification into a county probate hearing, we would turn his spectacle into a legal dead end. On the morning of the hearing, Ethan entered the courtroom confident and loud, surrounded by local counsel. He thought it would be another dinner table where he spoke, and I stayed silent. He had no idea Claire and I had rewritten the rules of the fight. So if you want to see exactly what happened when the judge broke that seal, and how my brother's smirk finally disappeared, make sure you subscribe now and follow me into the next part of this story. The air in the probate courtroom felt stale, heavy with counterfeit grief and greed. My family sat clustered behind Ethan, a wall of silent approval. They watched him as though he were a conquering hero, their pride unshaken by the cruelty he was about to unleash. Ethan adjusted his tailored jacket before stepping into the witness box. He treated the judge like an equal, smiling with false camaraderie, and began his performance. I studied him not as a sister, but as an operative watching a target walk directly into a well-laid snare. Every sentence was the lie I had predicted, each word a necessary piece of bait. My sister, he said, voice rich with feigned sadness, has never served. She has no discharge papers. No VA card, no record at all. He shook his head for effect. She lied to our father to steal my inheritance. Then, leaning closer to the microphone, he delivered the final strike. It's stolen valor, plain and simple. The words rippled across the room, designed to brand me a fraud before strangers and kin alike. But instead of fury, I felt only a quiet clarity. The bait was taken. The trap sprung. Ethan reclined smugly, certain he had won. That was the moment Claire Robinson rose. Her movements were precise, her voice deliberate, carrying a gravity that silenced the room. "Your Honor," she said evenly, "we have a document for the court's consideration. It is to be reviewed in camera." She placed the sealed envelope upon the bailiff's desk. The judge exhaled, weary from what he assumed was another delay. With a flick of his thumb, he cracked the red wax seal. I watched his expression transform as he unfolded the single sheet. The letterhead alone carried weight, the unmistakable seal of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. His indifference shattered. Shoulders squared, eyes sharpened, the judge seemed to age and awaken in the same instant. Color drained from his face, replaced by tension and a flicker of fear. His gaze swept the courtroom, bypassing Ethan's grin and landing on the deputies at the rear. "Officers, seal this court. Now." The oak doors boomed shut, bolts sliding home with a metallic thunder that made my mother flinch. The judge lifted one hand, finger trembling as he pointed to the court reporter. "You are off the record." The judge's gaze fixed on Ethan, still frozen in the witness stand. His confident smirk had collapsed into a slack, vacant stare. When the judge spoke, his voice was stripped of every trace of patience. "Mr. Cross," he said, each syllable deliberate, "you are a civilian who, under sworn testimony, has made specific claims regarding the service status of a United States government employee." The judge raised the single sheet. "This document confirms that your sister's service is a matter of national security." His words fell like hammer strikes in the still courtroom. Ethan's face shifted from confusion to raw terror. "Your accusations, now entered into federal record," the judge continued coldly, "may constitute an attempt to expose a protected government operative. You will remain silent. A U.S. Marshal will take your statement when this proceeding concludes. This family dispute is now a federal matter." Then he turned to me. For the first time, he saw me not as the shadow of Ethan's brilliance, not as the family's disappointment, but as something else entirely. His voice softened, touched with respect, and something close to awe. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "my apologies. We will adjourn to chambers to finalize your father's will." Ethan sat pale and motionless, a statue in shock. Behind him, Margaret looked as if the floor had given way beneath her. Their world, the illusion of control and superiority they had spent decades building, had collapsed in an instant. Not through debate, but through a power they had never even considered. I did not look at them. I gave the judge a slow nod and rose, following him out. For years, Ethan had accused me of living in a fantasy. In the end, it took a sealed courtroom and the shadow of a federal indictment for him to learn that my reality was far heavier than his illusions. In chambers, the will was executed with clinical efficiency, dry language, swift signatures, and then it was done. The true ending came minutes later on the courthouse steps. Claire and I emerged into the cool afternoon. 2 U.S. Marshals escorted Ethan toward an unmarked car. His designer suit was crumpled, his skin ashen. For a fleeting second, our eyes met. His gaze begged for his sister to rescue him. I felt nothing. The bond had snapped. I turned away, the click of my heels the only sound that mattered. The war was over. 6 months later, I stood in a room far from any courthouse, a place of solemn reverence known as the Hall of Valor at Defense Intelligence Agency headquarters. It was a classified ceremony closed to the public, attended only by those of us who lived in the shadows. General Peterson stood before me, the same man whose calm voice had carried me through moments when a single misstep could have altered history. In his hand was the Director's Award for Distinguished Service, a medal I could never display for a mission whose name could never be spoken aloud. He pinned it to my uniform, his eyes reflecting a respect deeper than anything my own family had ever offered. The citation was deliberately vague commendation for the successful execution of Operation Blind Harvest. To anyone outside this hall, those words were meaningless. To those inside, they carried the weight of lives saved, of secrets protected, of dangers averted. This was my real inheritance, not the account left by my father, but the recognition of those who understood what I had given. After the ceremony, my team gathered around me. There were no booming congratulations or theatrical gestures like the ones Ethan had always drawn from our family. Instead, there were quiet nods, firm handshakes, and brief knowing glances. These were the people who truly saw me. Here I was not the forgotten daughter. Here I was, Echo 7. Later that week, I sat at my desk scanning satellite images for an upcoming operation when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. My hand hovered over the notification. I didn't need to open it to know. It was my mother. The message was short, frantic, dripping with entitlement I knew by heart. "Natalie, Ethan's legal fees are unbearable. He's facing charges. Please, you must do something. Make a call. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding." I read it twice. I waited for the old anger, the familiar sting of dismissal and contempt. But nothing came. Only silence, vast and steady. It wasn't really about Ethan's case. It was about dragging me back into their orbit, into the endless cycle where I was expected to carry their chaos, an attempt to reclaim the invisible daughter. I looked from her words to the operations map glowing on my screen. One life was behind me, the other was my reality. The choice was easy. With steady hands, I deleted the thread and blocked the number. My work was my priority. My peace was my own. I've learned that peace isn't something granted by others. It's something you claim for yourself. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to walk away from people who refuse to value you? Share your advice, so others can find strength in your words. And remember, you don't have to sacrifice your self-worth to keep someone else comfortable. Subscribe if you believe that choosing your own peace is the bravest fight you'll ever win.